Thank you for joining my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Machette, and we are the Astrology Star Sisters. Joining me today is Madam Simon. Welcome, Simon. How are you?
Good, Liz. Thank you for having me.
So, how you doing after the eclipse?
Tired. Sometimes eclipses, solar eclipses, since the sun is the source of our life and light and energy, we can feel like our energy is a little low in connection with the solar eclipse. So, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, and I did a lot of yard work today, so I feel good that I've got quite a bit of things accomplished today, and I hope to continue on that trend for the next couple of days. So we'll see how I do.
Right.
So, Madam Simon is an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, visionary artist, and you can reach Simon at iconalchemy.com. I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, and tarot reader, and you can reach me through my website at alightpath.com. And we always enjoy hearing from you. So, we're talking about the Leo solar eclipse new moon, and Simon has shared this image with us. So, I'll let Simon tell us about it. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. So it's photo manipulation. I do a fair amount of this kind of digital art where I'm quite a shutterbug. I photograph a lot of things, and some of them I turn into these photo manipulations where I change the color, I alter the texture, and in this case, yes, this one's a little exaggerated on the color, and also at the same time we've got that kind of graying out of the background, because one of the things that we see with a solar eclipse is a change in the light. So that is why I chose this piece.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your art with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we're in the time of Leo. Leo is in the fixed modality, stable, follow through, determination, resists change. The ruling planet is the sun. It's in the fire element, energy, desire, passion, excitement, adventure, competition, motivation. And the mantra is I show. And will you share the keywords and cautions with us?
Sure. So some keywords for Leo are self-expression, creativity, being appreciated, vitality, passion, leadership, confidence, playfulness, focus. Um, some of the cautions are being egotistical, dogmatic, power-centered, arrogant. Some other things that I um, associate with Leo. Leo has a kind of generosity of spirit. And so when Leo's being creative, when Leo's, showing up and being in the center of the spotlight, it's not necessarily being egotistical. It could actually be being very generous, sharing of themselves. And I very much associate warmth with Leos as well for that reason. Um, on the cautionary side, something that I associate with Leos is this flip side um, of the more positive or socially acceptable ways of Leoness. Leos can be a force of nature, for good or ill. So,
Thanks for sharing that with us. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to roughly go over the out of bounds planets around this time frame. Um, that means a planet that's when the declination exceeds 23 degrees and 27 minutes north or south. Planets are out of the bounds of the sun and acting on their own and acting out of character. So the moon was out of bounds a day before this eclipse from the 7th through the 11th, and then again from the 20th to the 25th. Mars is out of bounds from August 3rd through the 28th for 25 days, and Pluto went out of bounds today through December 10th for 120 days. Anything you'd like to add, Simon?
I do find it interesting that this solar eclipse is occurring in this little window between the moon being out of bounds. Um, that's just an interesting little point of curiosity to me.
Yes, absolutely. So here's the chart for the Leo new moon solar eclipse, 20 degrees in 1 minute of Leo with that green circle around it on August 12th at 10:37 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time and 1:37 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And this chart is for Seattle, Washington. The eclipse was visible from eastern Greenland, the west coast of Iceland, northern Spain, northwest Portugal, and the Atlantic Ocean. And this eclipse for the west coast of the U.S. is happening in the 11th house of groups and friends. Anything you'd like to say?
No.
Okay. So we'll start out with some aspects, and we have a grand fire trine um, with the eclipse, the sun and the moon, and that south node in Leo, trine Saturn, Pallas Athena, Eris, all in Aries, and a trine to natural black moon Lilith in Sagittarius at 22 degrees and 8 minutes of Sagittarius. So go ahead, Simon.
Okay. So this grand fire trine emphasizes obviously the Leo qualities of warmth, right? And where those of us in the Northern Hemisphere are experiencing the warmth of summer. But also, fire is associated with our spirit, our courage, our action, our vitality. It's this yang energy. And so, even though Leo is a fixed fire sign and therefore less movement oriented than the other fire signs, there still is that sense of motion that comes with fire signs. This eclipse is very loosely trine Saturn, and that's a 6-degree orb. So that's a little on the wide side, but it is definitely still there. So there is that Saturnian influence. And then we have these minor planets and the lunar apogee, Black Moon Lilith, that are creating this grand fire trine. And because those are the minor planets that are involved, and Black Moon Lilith, who is an empty point in space, right? I feel like this grand fire trine is something that is a more subtle influence than if it was all major planets involved. And yet, it's still there. It's still this kind of little background hum going on to this eclipse. And since this is a south node eclipse, the south node, sometimes it can have a sense of negation or removal or release, letting go of things, as opposed to the north node, which is, has more of this sense of a hunger moving toward things, right? And yet, either one of the nodes is going to bring emphasis to what they touch in one way or another, even if that emphasis turns out to be on, okay, I'm moving away from this, or I'm no longer acting the way that I used to in this area of life, right? So I feel like that is actually kind of fitting again with this. There's this grand fire trine, but there's also this kind of, emptiness or sense of removal that is involved with that. This letting go, but also in the case of that Black Moon Lilith, like I said, it's an empty point in space. And so there's that, like we're taking a breath and other things are kind of moving out of the way, right? Um, Lilith also, brings up our feelings of where we don't fit into the usual pattern of things, or where we we've stepped outside of the ordinary realm of being. The lunar apogee is this point in space that is between the moon and the sun when the moon is furthest from the earth. And so it's interesting because there's this both this relationship with the moon and the sun there. We can see it's like this bringing some consciousness to our unconscious processes. Okay. But at the same time, further away from Earth, further away from what is that normal human realm. Okay. Palace, it relates to our strategic thinking, our wisdom. Eris is also disruptive, like Lilith is, and remember that the Lilith figure and Eris figures are, neither one of them are the ones who get invited to the party, right? Neither one of them are the ones who are popular, who are, who easily fit into the standard social structure, right? And one of the things that is interesting with regard to Leo, Leo being ruled by the sun, under normal conditions, it shows up, right? That's what Leo is about being seen, about being heard, about being recognized, and sharing of oneself, of one's creative expression, of one's warmth and vitality with others. But here with an eclipse, okay, the very planet, or the sun, planetary, I believe is the traditional word that means a wandering star. So it was the stars, including the sun, that appeared to move against the backdrop of the heavens, whereas the fixed stars, we're looking at them from a much further distance, and so their movement is much slower and harder for us to perceive. Okay. So the sun, as the ruling planet of Leo, here is having that light disrupted. And so that then suggests that this is a shift in how is Leo showing up and being Leo, right? How is Leo being seen? In this case, being seen by an absence rather than being seen by the light. And so I find that very interesting within this context of the trine to Eris and Lilith in particular, but again, also with Pallas in there as well, and with Saturn in there. Saturn is also associated with, among other things, with loss, right? With hardship, with our struggles. And, how do we attempt to maintain some measure of form and structure in our lives, particularly when it seems like things are being removed, or like, they're, that structure, that reality is being challenging. Okay. So this is a paradoxical grand fire trine here, right? That sun that is, it not seen for the time of the eclipse, nonetheless is there. And so I feel like this grand fire trine reflects that condition of being where perhaps by our absence, we make more of an impression than by our presence. What do we choose to remove ourselves from? What do we make a statement on by not speaking? Okay. You know, choosing not to participate in something is a choice, right? It
Mhm.
it says something when we choose not to do something. Um, and so I feel very much like this is asking us, who are we not just when we're showing up, but who are we when we are not showing up? And how can that disrupt the status quo? And is that something that we may need to do strategically in order to achieve our aims?
Thank you. So, what significance would it have that this is a South Node eclipse?
Well, a South Node eclipse, is at the tail of the dragon, right? Um, the lunar nodes are sometimes referred to as the dragon, the North Node being the head, the South Node being the tail, um, which means that the tail is associated with, among other things, excretory function, right? Um, that North Node moves toward something. We're moving toward the lessons that we are learning in this lifetime. And that means moving toward unfamiliar territory, right? A place we have not been before. Whereas the South Node is a place where we've been before. Um, and while, yes, that South Node can be associated with release, with letting go, it can also be associated with where are we most comfortable, which I also find interesting in this context. You know, are we comfortable in the dark?
Mm.
Okay. Um, and if so, or if we haven't been before, but now maybe we have an opportunity to be comfortable in this space where we're not having that daylight consciousness as usual. What are we learning in that darkened space? Um, what do we learn when our eyes are closed? What do we learn um, when we don't have logical explanations for things? We are currently living through extraordinary times, right? Or at least very interesting ones. And sometimes we may not have answers for things that previously we would have thought we'd have answers for. That were part of our normal consciousness, but things are changing rapidly and in directions we might not have anticipated. Perhaps we still can have some intuitions about that. The moon is there. Intuition, instinct, emotion. Okay. Perhaps we can have some of those that can give us some insights where our consciousness, where our logic fails.
Thank you for adding that. I appreciate it. So, we're going to go to another aspect pattern with a T square, Venus opposite Neptune, square Mars in Ceres.
Okay. So I want to start out by pointing out that Mars is the only one of the major planets in a yin sign. And we've got, two of these goddess asteroids here that are also in yin signs, and Chiron is in a yin sign. Everything else is in a yang sign. Everything else is, either head oriented in the case of the air signs, or action oriented in the case of the fire signs. Mars is the personal planet who governs action. And so I find this to be a really interesting kind of filter for all of this fire energy. It's all coming down on Mars. And here Mars is in the sign that is considered to be the fall. of Mars, right? Mars is in exaltation in Capricorn, the opposite sign of Cancer. And here Mars is in this watery sign. One of the things about water signs, when Mars is in one of them, is that our actions are determined by our feelings. And if we're not feeling it, it ain't gonna happen, right? Um, and literally, that's not even a matter of like, oh, we're being obstinate and just refusing to do something because we're not feeling it. It's that, no, like, our energy levels are tied to our feelings. Our willpower becomes tied to our feelings. And willpower is not infinite. Okay. Willpower effectively is a muscle that needs to be exercised, but you can't just like push your will endlessly. Sooner or later, it gives out. Okay. There are certainly ways in which you can strengthen it like a muscle, but it is not infinite. And I say this as a person who has pushed through on sheer willpower with a lot of things in my life. And yet there comes that point when you have to take a break. And in the case of Mars, our will being tied to our feelings, if something's disrupting our feelings, it becomes a lot harder for us to generate the willpower or sustain the willpower to keep going and keep getting things done. And Mars in Cancer, Cancer is, first of all, ruled by the moon that is involved in that eclipse. Right? So very much being colored by the eclipse. But also, Cancer draws things closer to home, right? It's domestically oriented. It's self-protective because of its emotional sensitivity, and protective of, family and close circles of friends, right? Even if Cancer, is aware of what other planets in perhaps more social signs are doing, as is the case here with the square to Venus, it's still going to be focused on what is closest, partly because that's what it has the, shall we say, the emotional bandwidth for, right? So that Mars is having to do a whole lot of work, and it's right there at the 0 degree of Cancer. Just got into Cancer. It's like, oh boy, what have I walked into? Right? And so Mars is applying then to these squares to first Neptune and then Venus. Venus is domiciled. Venus is in her home sign of Libra, one of her two home signs, the other one being Taurus. And so Venus here is at the height of her power, right? She's sociable, gracious, beautiful, diplomatic. She's concerned with, how are we going to have an equitable relationship? How are we going to have a balance between people? Okay. And so one of the things that a perfect hostess does, for example, is make sure that all of the guests are equally happy in terms of whatever it is that makes them happy, because the same things are not going to make everybody happy, right? So Venus in Libra is balancing those concerns, right? And since she's in her own home, she is well resourced to do that, to be that perfect hostess. But there can still be that tendency with Libra to be so concerned about multiple viewpoints as to have difficulty being decisive. And also there can be that tendency to say, oh, I really want everybody just to be happy. Maybe I will step back on something I want in order to make sure that everybody else is happy. Except that doesn't actually keep the peace in the long run. It just sweeps something under the rug, and then you have to deal with it later, and resentments may fester there. So that's always a caution with Libra placements, and especially with Venus here in her power, squaring off against Mars. Venus is what we want. Mars is how we get what we want. And if how we get what we want right now is like, I just want to be a hermit crab in my shell. Okay. Whereas what we want is like to have, a bright, vivacious party. Well, we can see there's going to need to be some compromise between the two. And in the case of a square aspect, there's more friction there between the two. It is difficult for us to get what we want socially if all we want to do is hide in bed. Okay. And this T-square involving Neptune then makes everything a little bit more cloudy and confusing, which again is interesting in the context of what I was talking about with that grand fire trine and the eclipse, this sense of loss of visibility, stepping back and, being like, wait a minute, things look different. They look very, very different. How do I navigate my way through the darkness? Well, Neptune is very concerned with spiritual matters more than mundane, everyday, practical matters. And so it's not that Neptune is necessarily trying to make things more confusing. It simply is that it's operating on a different level of consciousness than everyday daylight consciousness. And so we can associate, things being foggy, confusing, or glamorous, right? And that Venus-Neptune opposition can pump up the glamour quite a bit. But since they're in opposition, again, there's still that dichotomy between, what is ordinary human experience versus this spiritual boundlessness that can kind of break our brains if we try to contemplate it too much with our ordinary consciousness. So we may find that, we see things that we think that we want. We don't know how to get them. Maybe they aren't actually what we want, but we're not sure because there's this glamour all around it. Neptune is associated with, among other things, the silver screen, right? Movies and Hollywood and glamour and, all the pretty things. When Neptune is showing up prominently, whether it's in a natal chart or in a transit chart, you can have, that extra, there's something shimmery and wonderful about that person. You see them through rose-colored glasses, right? But that doesn't mean that's the truth of the matter. And I think Venus here is going to be doing her darndest to, try to navigate and balance out this difference between the Mars that wants to hide out at home and the Neptune that's making social matters look that much more enticing, even though our energy levels are not necessarily up to that enticement. And again, it's very important anytime we've got a hard aspect to Neptune to be discerning, especially if it involves something that, kind of pulls on our heartstrings, that says, oh, please, help this person who seems, in such dire straits, and we want to be compassionate. And compassion is a lovely thing. I am not arguing against being compassionate, okay? But there is also a greater possibility of being scammed, being led down the garden path, even by people who might, not necessarily mean something bad, but just what they are seeking and what you are seeking are not necessarily the same things. So I feel like there is an emphasis on communication here, and we will see that in the next slide.
And here we are. So we have an envelope, which Simon introduced me today. I'd heard of it, but I just wasn't paying attention. So I was so thankful that she shared that with me. So we have Venus trine Uranus, trine Juno and Pluto, Uranus sextile Mercury and Neptune, Mercury sextile Venus and trine Neptune, Mercury opposite Pluto and Juno, and Venus opposite Neptune. So that's a lot to digest, but go ahead, Simon.
So the reason I mentioned an emphasis on communication is because we see Mercury here applying to a conjunction with Jupiter, which I believe perfects on Saturday. And so, Jupiter makes whatever Jupiter touches bigger. Okay. And so Mercury applying then to that conjunction with Jupiter makes thought and communication and commerce. Okay, all of those are Mercury topics. Information, organization of information. That applying conjunction is going to make Mercury matters bigger. Okay, and Mercury here is stepping into the ongoing cradle configuration, what the internet has been referring to as Barbell's basket, which has been going on since July, mid to late July. That has involved all of the outer planets, okay, those being Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and then this big social planet, Jupiter. Okay, the two social planets are Jupiter and Saturn. Okay, and Saturn relates to kind of the structure of reality. Jupiter can relate to our beliefs. Okay, the things that we are learning on kind of a grander scale than simply little tidbits of information, which is Mercury's purview. So here we have, a planet, a personal planet, Mercury, that deals with, kind of the small bits of information, our foundational learning, what we learn in early childhood. And then that's moving toward this planet that's about this synthesis of ideas on a bigger scale, and how do we apply them socially? How do they impact our the way that we encounter people from places we've never been? Jupiter governs travel to foreign countries. Jupiter is philosophical and, concerned with faith and optimism and hope, all of which are great things, but also, can be used to excess. Jupiter can be very excessive. Okay. And, you will note here, Jupiter is trine Neptune in this configuration. And so that just adds to this kind of sense of boundarylessness when we are looking at the big forces, the big transpersonal forces at work in the world today that are all operating together within this configuration. So this configuration is actually, it can be seen as two cradle configurations put together and overlapping, two kite configurations overlapping. We've got that central grand air trine of Venus, Uranus, and Pluto, and the goddess asteroid Juno. Okay. So that's going to emphasize our thought and communication, going back to Mercury. Okay. Uranus is in a Mercury ruled sign. Okay. So there is this strong emphasis on how do we communicate in order to navigate both our personal relationships and our how those relationships interface with the larger society and the issues concerning society, the issues concerning our entire world right now. Okay. The outer planets mark generations, right? They move slowly. And so astrologers often describe, certain generations based upon their Pluto sign in particular, because that's the slowest moving of the lot. This configuration also can be said to be a mystic rectangle with a minor grand trine on top. And so we see these two oppositions at work. The Venus-Neptune opposition that I mentioned, and the Mercury-Pluto opposition, also Jupiter-Pluto opposition that's overlapping there. Okay, so Venus-Neptune does ramp up the glamour, like I mentioned. Also ramps up, these ideas of romance. I said ideas of because this is, Venus in an air sign. So concerned with the thought and communication upon which we build our relationships and how we sustain our relationships and networks of relationships as well. Certainly both when we're looking at Venus and Neptune in aspect together, that can be high romance, but it's not just our intimate relationships, right? It can very much relate to what are our ideals around our social networks, whether that's circles of friends or people who are working together for a cause. Again, because ideals are involved. That's why I mention it as, potentially working together for a cause as opposed to necessarily, our day-to-day work, though it can involve that too. Okay. It could be something simply as mundane as how do we interact with the people at the grocery store? But typically it's going to factor into what are our ideals. Okay. And Jupiter just amps that up. Mercury opposite Pluto and Juno. So this Pluto-Juno combination, I've been talking about that on this show for a while as they've been sort of dancing around each other. And, Juno, I definitely have to credit Diana Rose Harper for really shifting my understanding of Juno to recognize she's not just about our interpersonal relationships, though she certainly can't relate to that. Juno is named for, a goddess of marriage, right? But she's not just about the marriage. She's about the institution of marriage. She's about the society that it depends on these institutions meaning certain things, behaving in certain ways, and being upheld, right? What does a marriage mean if we don't agree that it means certain things, right? It's all well and good for two people to say that they're marriage, but if the society around them doesn't recognize that, it's only going to go so far. Okay. And so I've come to very much relate Juno to the fabric of society, what sustains the fabric of society, the commitments we make, and where we decide that those commitments are no longer valid, right? And so here we've got Juno and Pluto. Juno, I believe, is at 29 degrees of Capricorn there. So they're in, this kind of loose conjunction together. They're both retrograde. Retrogrades, of course, have us reviewing things, reconsidering things, but also doing so on a more internal basis. So we're less likely to see, great external manifestations of the themes of these planets, as opposed to, there's a lot of stuff going on internally for people surrounding these themes. And Pluto in particular can relate to power dynamics. It shows us what is ripe for composting, what is in need of transformation, what is rotten in Denmark or wherever we happen to be. And therefore, what is no longer able to stay the way that it was. And when I see that with the goddess asteroid of the social fabric, that says the status quo surrounding the social contract cannot remain the same. What it will be transformed into, that's up to us to make the effort to do that, to do that in accordance with our ideals, that's sextile to Neptune, in accordance with our faith and optimism, that opposition to Jupiter, and to be discerning, to be willing to get to the bottom of some mysteries, to look under every stone, to look into the deep, dark depths of things. That is that Mercury opposite Pluto. And also to be willing to have hard conversations. Okay. And again, because we've got Venus involved in this grand air trine with that Pluto and Juno, then there's going to be this personal impact and a desire to weigh our options, right? There's that balancing act that Venus in Libra likes to do, to try to make things fair and equitable for more than just a few people. And Uranus in that grand air trine says there must be some liberation involved, right? Uranus can also bring sudden shocking change, things turning on a dime, right? The key word that I have had ringing through my head for this eclipse is pivot. Pivot. Make that shift. Whatever that shift may be. And it might, for some people, it might be a very small shift. For other people, it might be really big, depending upon how this eclipse interacts with their own charts. But I do feel like, this configuration happening at the same time during the same week as this eclipse points to the ways in which our personal interactions and awareness of the big forces in our lives is a huge part of what shapes the generational interactions, the transpersonal themes at work. The world does not get better unless individual people, connect together and develop the relationships that will help it to be better.
Well said. Thank you so much. So we're going to move on to the lunar phase family or gestational phases. It uses the same 4 phases through the month of new, first quarter, full, and last quarter. And Pessin discovered that these phases, playing out in 9-month intervals, occurring in the same sign in approximately the same degree, and each moon family can reveal a pattern and unfolding of a storyline. So we're starting a new phase on August 12th at 22 Leo. Then the first quarter will be May 12th of 27 at 22 degrees Leo. The full phase will be February 10th of 28 at 21 degrees Leo. And then the third quarter will be November 9th of 28 at 18 degrees Leo. And if you like working with the moon phases, this is just showing another way that you can use the moon phases over a 3-year period. And some of them have been very active for me and some not so much. But we have the month to month, then the 3 years, and then we have the yearly one. So we have a yearly lunar phase, the Leo new moon today on August 12th. And I made a mistake on that one slide back here because I wrote 22 Leo. It's 20 degrees Leo at the new phase. I'm sorry about that. And then the Leo full moon will be January 2nd of 27 at 2 degrees Leo. So then that's another way that you can use the lunar phases is on a yearly basis too. And it's really interesting if you track the moon, how it works for you. Have you ever tracked the moon for you, Simon? Not too much?
Not too much. What I do track, I do pay attention to this kind of 6-month period between eclipses, right? And what is it that is shifting over that period from eclipse to eclipse?
And another one is like the moon phase halfway in between this eclipse and the next solar one. So it's like it's kind of a midpoint. Sometimes that's things are changing. So that's another point to look at also. Well, Simon, it's been great having you on today. I want to thank our audience for watching the Astrology Star Sisters today. We hope you come back very soon. We appreciate your support, and we have a couple more slides to finish up. So Simon's going to tell us about her Patreon page.
Thank you, Liz. So I write about astrological transits there. Over the past year in particular, I've become more oriented towards the trans-Neptunian objects and other minor planets. There's a whole lot going on in our solar system that most people are not aware of. And I find this to be, a fascinating frontier in astrology. So I do include a fair amount of talk about those minor planets in connection with the astrological transits of the major planets that we know more about. And I also create custom astrological art for my patrons, and also invite patrons into see some of my behind the scenes process for other astrologically and divination themed artwork that I do. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I'd love to see you over there. I am also a consulting astrologer like Liz is. And so if you wish to schedule a consultation with me, you can visit me at iconalchemy.com.
And thank you for sharing your art with us on the show. Almost every time you're on, you've been sharing some art with us. So I appreciate that. Like Simon said, I'm a consulting astrologer in person and on Zoom. I have a newsletter and YouTube channel, so I always appreciate you subscribing. There's lots of past shows in the archives and at least one show a week approximately, and sometimes two. So lots to look forward to. So I hope to see you back here soon. And I want to thank our sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software, an astrology software for Mac and Windows. And you can find out more information on astroperegrine.com. Well, it's been a pleasure doing the show with you today, Simon, and I look forward to having you on again soon. So it's time for us to say goodbye for now, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, Simon.